First of all, we watch episodes 1 to 5 because 6 comes out in 2 days. And because it's halfway through, and because after 5 all the actors change, we thought it was a good idea to split our comment in 2 sections. So episode 1 to 5 and episode 6 to 10 of House of the Dragon.
So we don't know what this is. We don't know if this is a podcast. We don't know if this is a video commentary. There is a lot of it.
It's both. It's
YouTube.
a podcast commentary.
But the idea is that we personally like to do stuff and have like video like this in the background. So we thought of doing this with the purpose of, you know, having other people using our videos while they're doing other stuff, having our videos in the background while they're doing other stuff.
I think we should start with our first point, which was the relationship between some of the main characters. I did my research. We were watching House of the Dragon, but I haven't read the book. I've just heard people talk about the book because I thought it was interesting before going into the series. So whenever we refer to the books, it's based on that. So if we make any mistakes, please correct us.
I'll ask you questions.
Me?
I think yes.
Oh, okay.
I think I'm very interested in your opinion. We watched all the episodes together. Do you like how, technically speaking, from a screenwriting perspective, how characters are written in this show?
Yes. I think most of them are great characters, which is great because I've heard that in the book, Alicent and Otto, I think, are very unlikable, or at least everyone dislikes them, which is great. But I think the best villains are the ones that you still kind of like, and you still like have a reason to see what they're doing. There's no perfectly good and horrible character, and there's no terrible and disgusting one.
Do you think they are one-dimensional? Like, is there a character that you think is too much of a villain or too much of a good person?
I was afraid they were gonna make Rhaenyra like an invincible, amazing, who, you know, does nothing wrong, and I appreciate that, you know, I stand corrected.
I noticed that as well.
Didn't
She's
do
not
that.
like, the danger would have been to create it like sort of like second version of Daenerys.
Exactly.
Like, okay, we're giving you like the version of Daenerys that we gave you before, except we're not gonna fuck up this time. It's like a different Daenerys, like a different Targaryen, a character on her own. And regardless of where you stand on House of the Dragon, I think we should all give credit to the fact that they're trying to make something very different from Game of Thrones. That the Iron Throne looks much better in this series.
I think in general everything is so beautiful, and I understand that they have, and I would say that they have a lot of money, more than Game of Thrones probably did in the first few episodes or first seasons. So it's definitely easier to make the dragons and just the VFX more beautiful just because they have more money, but also it just is more beautiful to look at. I think something that we should say is we didn't like them, but we didn't really appreciate episodes 1, 2, 3. We really liked 4 and 5, both of us, but 1, 2, 3, they fell a bit flat for us. And I think our problem was the crab feed. I'll just say that, the crab feeder.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
What the hell is a crab feeder? Which, first of all, stupid name. Like,
also, I don't think it was in the books at all, so it was just like something they thought was smart to put in.
Right.
And spoiler alert, it wasn't.
And if you add something that wasn't in the books, it has to be good. Like, it has to be something the plot needed. And so the crab feeder is like, so I would say the major villain of the first 3 episodes. It has nothing to do with what the plot of House of the Dragon is, what the main center of the story is, which is sort of like, you know, the inside of how the family is working for this.
And the power.
Yeah.
And I think just an insider look into court politics and the Targaryen family.
Yeah, I think the idea of the way I read House of the Dragon was like, do the Tudors just Game of Thrones version, just like with dragons, like the medieval fantasy versions of Tudors. And so to add the crab feeder, which is an external character, is a villain that supposedly should affect the plot. It should shake things. You know, when you're adding that extra conflict, you want it to take you somewhere. But to me, not only didn't take the plot forward, it didn't really push it forward, it didn't really drive an element of the plot, but it wasn't even well handled.
It was boring.
It was boring.
We didn't care about it. We didn't care. I think it's because we didn't know anything about the crab feeder or the place. I don't remember the name, but the place where it takes place, like the narrative. In that sense, it's a screenwriting problem because they didn't make me care about it. They didn't make me care about the people that were supposedly affected by the crab feeder. So when Viserys wasn't doing anything about it, I was like, okay, can we move on?
Yeah, and also I think we both found it very weird. Like, first of all, the name is crab feeder because the main, like, the weapon here are crabs. And worst of all, like, this story, like, the Targaryens have dragons. They have dragons, they spit fire. I'm not necessarily an expert on the topic, but I think dragons
It's very interesting.
Crabs.
Yeah.
Like, why is that a menace?
That I will say, I feel like I would have like, I love that we say dragons, but I think we also should see more dragons in general in life. So I think if I were working on House of the Dragon, I would just show the dragons so much, and I think they did that in episode 1 because, you know, it's the new thing, and even though we saw dragons in Game of Thrones, it took a while to see them in this adult form. So I think they were really excited to play with it and show it to the audience, and I wish they maintained that because I love seeing the dragons. They're so cool. I love that we can distinguish dragons. I feel like in Game of Thrones you didn't know who was who.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
absolutely.
And now you can, like, you know exactly, I don't know names, but you know exactly who Daemon's dragon is. And that's gorgeous. And I love it.
If you watched, it's a fantastic animated feature that I would highly recommend, How to Train Your Dragon.
No, I haven't watched
but
it.
But in the kind of like beautiful part of it is that there is like a strong connection between each character and their respective dragons.
Mm-hmm.
The dragons resembles their characters.
Oh, that's
it's
so
like
good.
The dragon version of each character, and so like you can understand that type of connection. I like that when we see Daemon's, I think Daemon is the name, Daemon's dragon, you can tell that is his dragon, and I like that too. I think that was cool.
And I think it's really, visually, the dragons are so cool, but it's also really fun to see like a dragon on screen and immediately know who they belong to. I mean, all the dragons in Game of Thrones belong to Daenerys, but I just felt like I didn't care and I didn't know who was who.
They were very generic.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't distinguish them.
Which, to be fair, makes sense to what the dragons were at that point in the story, but I think now that the dragons are such a key part of the Targaryen, it's just really cool and they're so well done. Also, since we're on the topic of dragons, something that we found both really interesting, and I think we can see that especially in episode 1, is that the Targaryens have always historically in Game of Thrones been defined by prophecies and dragons, and I thought it was really interesting how Viserys kind of takes more into consideration the prophecy part, even also because he was a dragon rider but his dragon died, so maybe that's why, whereas Daemon is really into the dragons and doesn't give a shit about the prophecy part. So I thought it was fun to see that because they're brothers, they're like two sides of the same coin. So I thought it was fun to see them representing each one of the key Targaryen characteristics, and it made me wonder, where does Rhaenyra stand on this? I'm interested to see how she resembles Daemon in the sense that I see her a lot in a lot of the things he does, and she's a dragon rider like he is. She hasn't really tapped into the prophecy side of the Targaryen yet. Really interested to see how they develop that, and obviously Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship as well, because things happened.
One thing that I found very interesting, and I think you agree because we spoke about this, is the way, because so a little premise that I think everyone by now is aware of. So Game of Thrones sort of like follows the same narrative tradition and tropes that we see in The Lord of the Ring, right? So in The Lord of the Rings, we have the ring symbolizing power.
And a lot of fantasy series in that sense.
Absolutely.
They all go
and
back
there's
to...
always this token, there's always this object that sort of like represents power and, you know, what power can do to people. And the Iron Throne should have, like, it has always meant to sort of like serve that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And it does to a certain extent in the original TVs, like in Game of Thrones. But I think it does more so even now. In House of the Dragon, you can truly appreciate what power does to you.
I really liked that in all the episodes, I think, or most of the episodes so far, we see little details of Viserys cutting himself on the Iron Throne.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool because it gets progressively worse because obviously he gets progressively more sick. But it's really interesting to see how he's cutting himself on the Iron Throne and hiding it from everybody around him, even like Otto, who's like his hand of the king, not anymore, but you know. So I thought that was an interesting detail because I think someone mentioned that in the books, you like obviously it's a challenge to sit on the throne and not be cut, but if you get cut by the Iron Throne, it means you're not fit to rule. So I thought that was an interesting detail that I really enjoyed.
So too. I really liked it. And one thing, again, I think we both agree on is that one thing the series does very well from a like directorial perspective, because it's really good, is that you can disagree on whether or not it's worth watching,
gorgeous,
you might not like it, but it's objectively gorgeous. And one thing they do very well is creating this sort of like moments of allegory and metaphors. They play a lot with symbols, they play a lot with blood. I think one thing we notice is that it's called, you know, Fire and Blood, and you can see blood throughout the series. In each episode, they will do something with blood. That blood symbolizes something. It's not just through there, just for the sake of it. There's always a reasoning. There's always like a symbol.
I think that's a good
representation
point.
of something.
Because people complained that in episode 1, the birth scene was a bit intense and unnecessarily so.
I loved it.
I know, I loved it. It's my favorite scene.
Fantastic scene.
But yeah, some people were like, I agree with the point that it should have had a trigger warning, but I don't agree with the fact that it shouldn't have been like that. The birth scene, I thought it was really well done, also because the juxtaposition between...
Yeah.
What's her name?
It was
Emma?
the tournament.
Yeah, Emma giving birth and Daemon in the tournament, because they've been going on the whole episode about the role of women, how like childbirth is their battlefield, and I thought visually it's, well, you can say all you want, but visually it's very, very powerful to portray
Absolutely.
like that.
Not only
so
that,
well done.
but I think that's very brilliant point idea that childbirth is sort of like we are going through the violence of what men going through when they go to war, when they do those tournaments, whether it's the risk of dying or injure yourself. But even more than that, I like the idea that from the very get-go you try to have this sort of like split, sort of like solid separation between who Daemon is and who Viserys is. And then you see both of them in these two scenes in parallel. Both of them are performing acts of violence for different reasons, but they're both the wrong reasons, and they are in both cases acts of violence. So I think that was very interesting.
I love this that you pointed out, and I think since we're talking about this, I think House of the Dragon is at its best to me when it does this kind of juxtapositions. Like that's the best scenes are when we see this, and it's not just opposing something, but the way they want to convey two separate stories or characters, and when you do it like that, I think it's when it's best. So episode 4 is another great example. So when we see Alicent and Viserys intimate moment compared to Daemon and Rhaenyra, and then further on Rhaenyra and
so I
Sir
think
Cris
you're
Stone
describing the part of the 4th episode 4, when Daemon is taking Rhaenyra to, how would you describe that?
Brothel?
Yes. That
is a pleasure house.
A pleasure house. Because his intention was to seduce her and I think impose himself onto her. He wanted to force himself to her.
I heard a lot of comments about this, and
it's not clear.
Yeah, it's not clear, but I saw an interpretation that was really interesting. Was Daemon just wants to control people around him, therefore he knew that this would make him like in control of both Viserys and Rhaenyra, and then when she starts enjoying it, that's when he loses his control.
She likes it.
Each scene separately would have landed anyway, but just opposing them together is just so much cooler.
Again, and you're absolutely right. Just like the tournament and childbirth scene, you have again Viserys and Daemon, one king that is supposed to be the wise, the generous,
do the right thing,
and doing the right thing. It should be like right and wrong, but it's very interesting how the series sort of like defies this idea, because on one scene you have Viserys pretty much raping a young girl, because on the other scene you have Daemon trying to do the same with Rhaenyra, but then when Rhaenyra
Anyway, moving on.
when Viserys finds out that Matt Smith tried to, rape his daughter, it gets mad. And it's interesting because it would have been kind of flat if we didn't have that scene. Like, we would already know that he's pretty much doing the same to another girl, by seeing it and sort of like understanding the characters to that level. That was genius. That was a work of genius. Whenever they do just oppose the scenes, they do it always for the right reasons. They do it with a rationale, and they do it very well.
And I think that this just opposes Alice, which they do throughout the series, but Alice and Rhaenyra, and the fact that, they're in a kind of similar situation, but also completely different, in the sense that throughout episode 4, I was thinking, oh, look at how Rhaenyra is afforded much more freedom than Alicent, even though Alicent is the queen and therefore would be just a step above her in the kind of line, right?
Yeah.
But like, Alicent could never do that, could never go out and to a brothel,
and
because she's not
uncle.
Exactly, because she's not a Targaryen.
Overall, I was very afraid, because one thing that I heard before starting the series was that this would have been a sort of like feminist series. It would have been a feminist narrative retelling of what Game of Thrones is, with particularly speaking about the Targaryens, exploring the Targaryens family, and I was afraid of it, because I don't think I think it's common knowledge now that every time Hollywood is trying to deliver some feminist movie, it turns out to be quite disrespectful to women. This idea that women are not complex at all, they have one struggle, their entire character revolves around the fact that they are women, which is precisely what we're trying to avoid when we ask for representation, that female characters should be treated as any other character.
Yeah. We're not sure who directed episode 1, 2, 3, but we know that 4 and 5 were directed by a woman, Claire. We stand Claire, we love you.
We stand Claire.
I don't know if Claire directed 1, 2, 3, but I know she directed my 2 favorite episodes so far, and I just want to say that it shows when there's a woman directing. I'm not saying that a man couldn't do it, but sometimes even women get it wrong in that sense, but I think that it's very telling that a story that is truly feminist in this sense and truly compares the struggles of 2 different women, or many different women, if we take into consideration all the characters in House of the Dragon, is told by a woman director. So I just want to say, slay to you, Claire, well done.
Really liked the episode, like the 4 and 5, episode 4 and 5. We're 100% sure it was directed by a woman. She's really good, because she really focuses on characters, plot, and dialogue.
Rather than just having action scenes.
Yes. Like the crab feeder, which you could definitely avoid. Like, you can spare that.
No.
And I think one reason why I personally think Game of Thrones was so successful, which I think is also the reason why House of the Dragon has the potential to become even better. I mean, it's already done, but like, if they follow this line...
but the future seasons.
Exactly, to reach that level of success, is because in Game of Thrones, and I think both, also House of the Dragon, the tension and conflict is within the dialogue.
Yeah.
It's not about what happens on the outside. The Red Wedding, it's cool, not because you see a bunch of people getting killed, because of all the backstory, tension, and build up that there is. Like,
that is quite similar to the Rhaenyra's wedding at the end of episode 5. That was cousin. It was amazing, not because we saw blood. It was amazing because there were so many plot lines that we've seen throughout episode 1 to 5 just come together.
A lot of shit was happening during that wedding, and it was so cool because we were. And I think as an audience, there's nothing better than being at the edge of your seat to actually wondering what's going to happen. This is so interesting. Because at the end of the day, every single piece of art in this form is a form of entertainment, and you have to be entertained. So I kind of wish we'll see less than the crab feeder type of bullshit, and we'll see more characters and character development.
If we could give an advice, which we can't because they've already done the series and they don't care about us, but if we could give an advice to the creators of House of the Dragon, I would say don't necessarily force yourself to put action scenes, because your product is good nonetheless. And this is our initial review of episodes 1 to 5. It can't be too long, so I think this is kind of like the things that we found interesting, but we can definitely go in more detail about like each episode or each character depending on like what happens in the future as well. Thank you for listening.